Have you ever been really trying to learn something new? Like really trying to get deep into something?
Oh, yeah.
And you run into someone who's just so sure they know everything, like they're the expert.
Uh-huh.
But it's so obvious that they actually have no clue what they're talking about.
Yeah, like they just read one article online or saw one YouTube video.
Right. And it's not just annoying. It's kind of like what's going on in their brain.
Totally.
So that's what we're going to be looking into today in this deep dive.
Yeah.
We're going to be talking about the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Yeah, and the Dunning-Kruger effect, it's not just some random thing people say. It's actually a really well-researched psychological thing.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And basically what it says is that, like, the less skilled someone is at something, the more likely they are to overestimate how good they are at it.
It's so true.
And then on the flip side, people who are actually experts at something, they often underestimate their ability.
Yeah, it's almost like the opposite of what you'd expect. And it's funny because one of the guys who discovered this whole thing, Dunning, he said, the first rule of the Dunning-Kruger Club is you don't know you're a member of the Dunning-Kruger Club.
I love that quote.
Isn't that great?
Yeah.
It's like this weird blind spot.
Yeah, a total blind spot where if you don't have the skills, you also don't have the skills to realize you don't have the skills.
Right. So today, what we're going to do is really dig into this Dunning-Kruger effect.
Yeah, let's break it down.
We want to understand, where did this idea come from? How does it actually work? What does it look like in real life?
Mm-hmm.
And probably most important for us, how can we see it in ourselves? How can we recognize it?
Yeah, because it's not just about understanding this effect. It's about how we learn, how we talk to other people.
Oh, yeah.
Even bigger issues in society. It affects all of that.
For sure. For sure. And the story of how they even started researching this is crazy. So picture this. 1995, there's this guy, MacArthur Wheeler.
Okay.
He robs two banks in broad daylight, no mask, nothing. And when they catch him, he's totally confused. Why did they arrest me?
No way.
And get this, his plan was to rub lemon juice all over his face.
Lemon juice?
Yeah, he thought it would make him invisible to security cameras.
Like invisible ink.
Exactly.
Oh my God.
Isn't that wild?
That's wild. It's on what planet?
Yeah, and that's what got these two guys, Dunning and Kruger, thinking. They were like, how can someone be so wrong and not even know it?
Right. It's not just a little mistake. It's a complete misunderstanding of how things work.
Totally. So how did they go about figuring this out? What did they do?
So they did these really cool studies.
Okay.
They had people, participants, try different tasks. So things like trying to understand humor, jokes.
Yeah.
Or using proper grammar or logic puzzles, that kind of stuff.
Okay, so testing different skills.
Exactly. And then after they did the tasks, they asked them, okay, how do you think you did compared to everyone else?
Oh, that's interesting. So they're judging their own performance.
Right, exactly.
And what did they find? What were the big outcomes?
Well, the results were pretty amazing. So the people who did the worst, the bottom 25%, they thought they did way better than they actually did.
Oh, really? By how much?
They thought they did better than 62% of the other people.
Wow.
But in reality, they only did better than 12%.
So they were way off.
Yeah, completely off. It's they were living in a different world.
That's a huge difference.
Yeah, huge.
So basically, the people who are the least skilled are also the worst at judging their own skill.
Right. It's this double whammy. Dunning called it the double burden of incompetence.
Okay, the double burden. I like that.
So, if you're not good at something, you're also not good at knowing that you're not good at it.
And this is all because they don't have the skills to do it right in the first place.
Exactly. And it's the same skills you need to get the right answer are the same skills you need to know what a right answer even looks like.
Okay, so let's unpack this double burden idea a little bit. What's the root cause of this? Why does this happen in our brain?
So it all comes down to something called metacognition, which is a fancy word for thinking about thinking.
Okay, so being aware of our own thoughts and stuff.
Exactly. And what the Dunning-Kruger effect shows is that when we're incompetent at something, our metacognition in that area is also messed up.
So we're not only bad at the thing, we're also bad at knowing we're bad at it.
Exactly. And this lack of awareness, it creates this illusion of superiority.
Illusion of superiority. So it's not just being unskilled, it's believing you're actually good.
Yeah, you genuinely think you're better than you are.
Wow. So what are the things that contribute to this illusion?
There are a few key things. One is this idea of unknown unknowns.
Okay, what are unknown unknowns?
So when you're starting out with something new, you don't even know what you don't know. It's like trying to build a house, but you don't even know that hammers exist.
Oh, I see.
You might think you're doing a good job with your bare hands, but you're missing all the essential tools and knowledge.
Right, you have no idea how much you're actually missing.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
And then there's this thing called confirmation bias.
Confirmation bias, right?
Yeah, where we tend to look for information that confirms what we already believe, even if it's wrong.
So we ignore anything that contradicts us.
Yeah, and we remember the times we were successful and forget about all the times we failed.
So if someone's not very good at something, they might only remember the few times they did well.
Right, and they'll make excuses for all the times they messed up.
Like blame it on something else.
Exactly. And then the last thing is that humans are just bad at judging ourselves objectively.
You mean like without some kind of outside reference point?
Yeah, we often fall for this thing called the above average effect, where we think we're better than most people at like everything.
Oh, the above average effect.
Yeah, it's like everyone thinks they're a great driver.
It's so true.
But obviously not everyone can be above average.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it's not just driving. It's like everyone thinks they're a good listener, a good communicator, a good cook.
Exactly. But statistically, that's impossible.
Right. So this above average thinking definitely contributes to the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Definitely. And it's funny because there's this quote by Bertrand Russell that I think captures this perfectly.
Okay, what do you say?
He said, "The whole problem with the world is that fools and fanatics are always so certain of themselves, but wiser people so full of doubt."
It's so true. The people who know the least are often the most confident.
Exactly. And the people who actually know a lot are more aware of how much they don't.
So it's not just a simple case of the less you know, the more confident you are.
Right. It's more nuanced than that.
Yeah.
The journey from being a total beginner to being an expert. It's like this up and down journey for your confidence.
But that's interesting. So like a roller coaster.
Yeah, kind of like that. There are different stages people go through.
Okay, let's break down these stages. What's the first one?
So the first stage is often called Mount Stupid.
Mount Stupid. Yeah.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah, it's where beginners who've just learned a little bit about something, they get this huge surge of confidence.
So they think they know way more than they actually do.
Exactly. It's like they read one article and now they're an expert.
Right, it's that classic, I saw a documentary once, so I'm basically a doctor now.
Exactly. And there's this Mark Twain quote that I think is perfect for this stage.
What did he say?
It ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so.
That's so good. So basically, this early confidence can lead to people making really bad decisions.
Totally. Because they think they know what they're doing, but they don't.
Right. Okay, so what happens after Mount Stupid?
Well, then comes the Valley of Despair.
Failure. Okay, that sounds less.
Yeah, this is where the learner starts to realize how much they actually don't know. Their confidence just plummets.
So it's that moment of realization that the subject is actually way more complex than they thought. Exactly. And they might feel totally overwhelmed, like they'll never understand it.
Right, so it's easy to just give up at this point.
Yeah, a lot of people do. But the ones who keep going, they start climbing the slope of enlightenment.
Slope of enlightenment.
Yeah, so with practice and feedback, their skills actually start to improve and their confidence grows.
Okay, so now their confidence is more realistic, more based on actual skill.
Exactly. They're not just guessing anymore. They actually know what they're talking about.
And eventually, they reach the top, the peak of expertise.
Yeah, and that's called the plateau of sustainability.
So at this point, they have a high level of skill, and they're also confident in their abilities.
Yeah, but it's not like the overconfidence of Mount Stupid.
Right, right. It's a more balanced and informed kind of confidence.
Exactly. They know what they know, and they also know what they don't.
And you mentioned earlier that sometimes experts can even be a little underconfident.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? And it's because they understand how complex their field really is.
Yeah. Oh, I see. So they're more aware of all the things that they still don't know.
Yeah, and they're okay with that. They're comfortable with uncertainty. Like Richard Feynman, the famous physicist, said, "I think it's much more interesting to live not knowing than to have answers that..."
That's a good quote. So this humility is like a sign of true expertise.
Yeah, it's a big difference from the know-it-all attitude of someone who's just starting out.
Okay, so this whole Dunning-Kruger thing, it's not just an interesting theory. It actually has real-world consequences.
Right, absolutely. It shows up everywhere.
Like where?
Well, think about work, for example. You often see people who aren't very good at their jobs, but they think they're superstars.
Yeah, I've definitely worked with people like that.
And this can be a problem because they might resist feedback.
Yeah, they're not open to learning and improving.
Right, and they might even make bad decisions that affect the whole team.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
What about in fields like medicine where the stakes are even higher?
Yeah, in healthcare, it can be really dangerous. There's been research showing that medical students who aren't very skilled often overestimate their abilities.
Oh, wow. So they might misdiagnose patients or give the wrong treatment.
It's possible. And
Right.
they might not ask for help from more experienced doctors because they think they know everything already.
That's a scary thought. What about in politics?
Yeah, politics is another area where the Dunning-Kruger effect can really cause problems.
How so?
Well, you often see people with very strong opinions about complex issues like the economy or foreign policy, but they don't actually have a deep understanding of those issues. And this can make it really hard to have productive conversations and make good decisions.
Right, because they're so sure they're right, even if they're not.
Exactly. And it seems like the internet and social media have made this whole thing even worse.
Oh, yeah, I can see that.
Because now anyone can share their opinion with the whole world, whether they know what they're talking about or not.
And it's presented in the same way as experts, right?
Yeah.
Like on social media, it all looks the same.
Right. It's hard to tell who's actually qualified and who's just really good at sounding confident.
Yeah, and everyone's trying to get attention, so they make these bold statements and oversimplify things.
Exact. And Neil deGrasse Tyson summed this up really well. He said, "One of the great challenges in this world is knowing enough about a subject to think you're right, but not enough about the subject to know you're wrong."
I love that quote. It's
Yeah.
so true. It's like that sweet spot of just enough knowledge to be dangerous.
Exactly. And it's hard to break out of that because of these things called filter bubbles and echo chambers.
Right, where we're only exposed to information that agrees with what we already believe.
Yeah, so we never get challenged, and we just become more and more confident in our own opinions, even if they're not based on reality.
It's like everyone's living in their own little world.
And then there's this thing called knowledge fragmentation.
What's that?
It's where we pick up bits and pieces of information from different places,
Uh-huh.
but we don't really have the big picture, the deeper understanding.
So we might know a bunch of facts, but we don't really know what they mean or how they connect.
Right, and that can make us overconfident because we think we know more than we do.
So it's not just about the amount of information we have, it's about how we process it and make sense of it.
Exactly. As Tom Nichols said in his book, The Death of Expertise, the internet can give us this false sense that everyone agrees with us and that our opinions are the right ones.
Right, because we're only seeing the information that supports our views.
Exactly. So what we need is not to avoid the internet, but to be more aware of how we're using it.
So like being more critical of the information we come across.
Yeah, and understanding that just because something is online doesn't mean it's true or accurate.
And being open to different perspectives, even if they make us uncomfortable.
Exactly. And I think Maria Popova put it really well when she said, we need to find a balance between critical thinking and hope.
Oh yeah, I like that. So not becoming cynical, but also not just blindly believing everything we read.
Exactly. It's about being thoughtful and discerning.
So this whole Dunning-Kruger effect, it's not just a personal thing. It actually affects society as a whole, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Think about voting, for example.
Right.
People might vote for a certain candidate because they sound confident and charismatic,
Uh-huh.
but they might not actually have good policies or the experience to lead.
So the Dunning-Kruger effect could actually influence election results.
Potentially, yeah. And in organizations, you might see people getting promoted who aren't actually the most qualified.
Just because they're good at presenting themselves.
Right. And then you have these confidence cascades where the whole organization starts valuing confidence over actual competence.
And that can't be good for the long-term success of the organization.
Definitely not. And we saw a really clear example of this during the pandemic.
Oh, with the misinformation and everything.
Yeah, people with no medical training were suddenly experts on virology and epidemiology.
And they were spreading all these false claims and conspiracy theories.
Exactly. And it was hard to know who to trust because everyone sounded so sure of themselves.
It's like the Dunning-Kruger effect on a massive scale.
Yeah, and it had real consequences for public health.
Right, because people were making decisions based on false information.
And this happens in other areas too, like education. People might push for certain teaching methods even if there's no evidence that they work.
Just because they sound good or they align with their beliefs.
Right, and this can harm students in the long run.
It seems like one of the key takeaways from all of this is that the more we learn, the more we realize we don't know.
Absolutely. It's like the more you learn, the bigger the universe of knowledge becomes.
And you start to see how much you're still missing.
Exactly. It's like climbing a mountain. You think you're at the top, but then you realize there's a whole range behind it.
And that can be kind of humbling, right?
Yeah, but it's also exciting. It means there's always more to discover.
So what's the most important thing you want our listeners to take away from this deep dive into the Dunning-Kruger effect?
I think the biggest takeaway is to be aware of this effect in ourselves.
Yeah, how do we do that?
It's tough, but I think the first step is accepting that we are all susceptible to,
Even if we think we're really smart or knowledgeable?
especially then, because the more confident we are, the less likely we are to question our own beliefs.
So what can we do to counter this?
One thing is to actively seek out feedback from others.
Especially people who know more than us.
Exactly. And be open to that feedback, even if it's not what we want to hear.
Yeah, that can be hard.
It is, but it's crucial for growth. And another thing is to focus on learning and practicing in areas where we know we're weak.
So not just doing more of what we're already good at.
Right, because that just reinforces our existing biases.
And being aware of our own thinking processes, right? Like being more introspective.
Exact. Asking ourselves, why do I believe this? What evidence do I have? Am I being objective?
And maybe most importantly, being okay with saying, I don't know.
Yeah, that's a big one. Our culture often values certainty and confidence.
Right. It's seen as a weakness to admit you don't know something.
But in reality, it's a strength. It means you're open to learning and you're not afraid to ask questions.
So basically, true wisdom is about recognizing how much we still have to learn.
Exactly. And being comfortable with that uncertainty.
And that's a great note to end on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the Dunning-Kruger effect.
My pleasure.
I hope this has given you all something to think about. So as you go about your day, maybe consider this. In what areas of your life might the Dunning-Kruger effect be subtly influencing your decisions or your interactions with others? Food for thought, right?
Definitely.
Okay, until next time.
See